Welcome back to the Caspian Game Awards, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we finally are doing an episode that I was supposed to do last month, but because of some personal things, I kind of didn't want to do it. So yeah, we did not abandon the Caspian Game Awards. I know we unfortunately did miss the 1-year anniversary of this show. Yeah, I know, because we started the show back in January of 2024. And it's been insane trying to go through just the past 35 years in gaming history. I learned a lot about just what releases came out during these during these past 3.5 decades. And it really did make me able to find and explore games that I probably otherwise wouldn't have known about at all. And I'm pretty excited about what we will be talking about with this particular episode. Sort of as a consequence of that. But as far as just the general show, I just want to say everyone, thank you guys for checking out this entire show. It really does mean a lot to me that this has become a major project of mine within the last year. And I'm definitely looking forward to finishing up the 90s. Obviously tonight we will be talking about 1991, then we'll talk about 1990 at some point, hopefully within the next week or two, and then we'll finally do the Big Kahuna 2024, the year that we did this entire series on. So that's pretty exciting. And yes, of course, I've got the envelope. Everyone knows the infamous envelope with all the awards on here. So I'm pretty excited about that. Now, that being said, for those who want a refresher on what the series is, or you may not even know what the series is because we've had plenty of new people join in, basically, this is an award ceremony that I started back in January of last year, 2024, where I wanted to do my own version of the Game Awards because, truth be told, I was not a big fan of how they handled the 2023 Game Awards, and truth be told, the 2024 Game Awards as well. And it really made me wonder what games should have gotten the awards. So, and while yes, 1991, this was before the Game Awards were actually a thing, I just pretty much decided to do the entirety of the 90s and early 2000s as well, just because I wanted to get, since that's just kind of the era of which I cover a lot of the media that I talk about anyways. And so I wanted to give the early 90s a bit of a shout out. So, which the last episode we did, 1992, spoiler alert for that, oh my god, that easily has to be one of the worst years we've covered in the entirety of the show. It wasn't even close. 1992, I'm telling you guys, it was really bad. But what about 1991? I mean, this was a fantastic, and dare I say, a amazing, fantastic year for, as far as music is concerned, as far as television is concerned. Movies as well was starting to really ramp up. 1991, a lot of people consider to be the true beginning of the 1990s, as it, like I said, a lot of amazing artists blew up this year. I mean, this was the year that grunge music really started to take off with Pearl Jam's 10, Nirvana's Nevermind, Smashing Pumpkins' Gish. It was definitely, or even Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. And even stuff like gangsta rap was starting to really become big around this time as well. And so the music scene was blowing up this year. But also animation, because this was the year that Nickelodeon started its Nicktoons block, which, well, obviously some of these shows have aged better than others, but the fact of the matter is that shows like Doug, Rugrats, and, well, unfortunately for the worse later down the line, Ren and Stimpy. Um, they really changed the game as far as animated content on television was concerned. And I mean, this was also the year of the Gulf War, so news coverage was very big around this, like in the early part of this year as well. Truth be told, so it was a very, very, very big part of like this year was very big as far as pop culture, and that's not even getting into like films from this year. I mean, this was the year that brought us Beauty and the Beast, which, in my opinion, is easily one of the best Disney animated films ever. But what does that mean with video games? Well, I will say this. It was definitely a better year than 1992. I would say that out of average, 1991 overall definitely had the better games. But I'm still not feeling like this was quite the time when gaming was really popping off. I mean, spoiler alert for the rest of the series if you guys haven't watched them. If I'm going to be honest, I feel like gaming really didn't start hitting its strides until around 1994-ish. And while, yes, this was the year that the Super Nintendo released in America, that's the key word. In America. A lot of the games that people think came out in 1991, they actually came out in 1990 in Japan originally. And we'll get to that once we get to the rules. But this was kind of a difficult year for me to research. If I'm going to be honest, the last episode put so much of a bad taste in my mouth that it really made me not want to do research for this particular year. And while, yeah, like I said, this was definitely a better year, oh my god, I had to really search deep. This, like, we're at the point in this show where I have to use so many different website sources. And I'm not even just talking about Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia sucks in a lot of ways, but even just besides that, I've also had to use, like, sketchy old-ass websites that probably haven't been updated in, like, 20 years to do my research on all of this. Because, unfortunately, the further and further away we get from modern time, the less and less of this stuff gets documented. And so, because of that, this is going to be a bit of a scatterbrained show as a result. Kind of like the previous one. And I have a feeling 1990 is going to be the same fucking way. So, again, I wouldn't say this is like the worst year we've covered, but if I'm going to be honest, considering that not only was it kind of hard to find many good games, I've also found a lot of NES shovelware games that came out this year. I mean, for fuck's sake, this was the year that brought us bullshit like Action 52, if anyone even remembers what that was. So, yeah, unfortunately, I would consider 1991, if we're not counting the North American release of the Super Nintendo, because like I said, I count that as a 1990 release because it released in Japan first. Yeah, 1991 is kind of one of the weaker years that we're going to be talking about. Not the worst, but just keep that in mind. That being said, though, the games that did come out this year that were great, they were bangers. We've talked about plenty of them before, and I hope to showcase them to you guys. But yeah, let's not wait any further. Let's go with the rules. So, of course, like always, for those who are new to the show, as far as what's able to get nominated, basically, we have to have games that actually released in the year itself. We don't do re-releases from outside of that. That originally released in, like, I don't know, like 1989, but eventually like had a port in 1991. We're not like that. It has to released within the full year. And we're not the Grammys. We don't do stupid cutoff dates.
Don't yell at me, yell at the Grammys.
Like, we don't do the weird thing that the Grammys did for the longest time and probably still do, where they have, like, the last 4 months of the year, like before the prior year, and then like the first 8 months of like the prior year count. We're not that. We're not doing that bullshit. It has to have released in that year. Also, just to keep it consistent and to keep it like concise, only 4 to 6 nominees are allowed per category. And as I was alluding to with the Super Nintendo, yes, while games like Super Mario World and F-Zero and Pilot Wings, they did come out in North America in 1991, keep in mind, those were not the actual initial releases of those games. Those games came out in 1990. And so because of that, we will not be nominating them here. But we may or may not be nominating them in the 1990 episode. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. As far as Game of the Year, basically it's just got to be a game that's generally liked by most people. Though if absolutely necessary, I will just start nominating games that I personally liked. I almost had to do that with this episode, but thankfully I didn't have to do any of that shit, so we should be fine. Also, keep in mind that this is a biased show, and so I'm only going to be choosing games that I am personally interested in, because I'm going to be frank, there's just some games that I just probably could get less of a fuck about. And in this first category, that is especially going to be the case. So do keep all that in mind. But either way, let us begin the show. Starting off, well, okay, these are our categories before we actually start off. So we have all the categories that we can actually do this year. So game by new studio, action adventure, platformer, role-playing game, shooter game, although keep in mind this is not mostly traditional first-person shooters because this is the early 90s. Those weren't quite as common yet. Sim strategy games, best art direction, and of course the titular game of the year. And it sounds like Rosemary is wanting to have her own piece on what's going on. So I guess we will be having a special guest right now. So let me just move this. Because we have a special guest. We have a special guest, ladies and gentlemen. We have Rosemary. Oh shoot! Oh shoot! Rosemary. Look. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. She's very, yeah. And yes, if you guys remember, I had to take care of this little kitty cat for the next like 8.5 months. So, Rosemary, are you ready to be my co-host? Oh, you're ready to be the co-host. All right. God, she's adorable. But yeah, I think okay. I guess she doesn't want to be co-host. Whatever, it's fine. But yeah, I think we are ready to begin. And I'm looking at the time, and I want to make this one quick. So let's begin. Starting off with our first category, the best game by new studio. Now, keep in mind that this does not mean your studio's first game, because there are going to be nominations on here that people will be confused, being like, oh wait, this wasn't this studio's first game. Like, what is this doing on here? Yes, but keep in mind, these are the games that actually started to gain some notoriety for the respective studios that we will be talking about. Again, these are not your first game. This is the first game that got you attention, whether it be through sales figures or a decent amount of reviews at the time. In this case, sales numbers, which thankfully we have data for a lot of these. That's like the one thing that is consistent about pretty much any sort of gaming media, is that they are consistent at keeping track of how many copies are sold. But with that said, some of these choices are going to surprise some people, and it surprised me as well. So let's talk about them. So these are the games that we'll be nominating. So minimum 4, there you go. So the first game we've got here is a game called Lemmings. It is a puzzle strategy hybrid game, where you have to basically guide these creatures called lemmings into portals before the time runs out, and you have to have a certain amount of them go into the portal before they die. It's kind of a cool, quirky little starter up gem here. Not the most modern gamer friendly type of game, if that makes sense. I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean, like, this is definitely not like your first or third person shooter style. Hell, this isn't even like a lot of strategy games. This was more of a, I guess, more casual strategy game. But what I find the most interesting about this game in particular is actually not the game itself, but it's actually the developers, TMA Design. Which, I don't know if you know who they are, because they may have eventually later worked on a particular, top tier franchise. Actually, multiple top tier franchises that a lot of people would know nowadays. And may or may not be having a highly anticipated game coming out later this year. What is it? I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head. What is it called? Oh, what? No, that can't be right. This is not made by the same people who were making Grand Theft Auto 6, right? You can't tell me. This is joking, right? Oh. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. DMA Design is Rockstar Games nowadays. This was their first major title. They went from this to GTA and Red Dead Redemption. I don't know how that transformation happens, but that's the case. So, yeah, that's so weird. Lemmings was made by the same developers as Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemptions 1 and 2. Not LA Noire, but they published LA Noire. Bully, Manhunt, and Max Payne 3. They also made Lemmings back in the early 90s. So, yeah, kind of an important studio, and kind of a very important game as far as I'm concerned. Very weird that it's in the same lineage, but we've seen weirder cases. Actually, no, this is probably the weirdest transition. I'm going to be real with you guys. So yeah, in hindsight, of course. But then we've got ourselves the next game, and I'm not gonna lie, this one, I feel like I kind of had to put this one on here. Even though I'm just gonna be frank with you guys, I am not a big fan of this franchise. I don't think I ever really was. We got ourselves Sonic. And I'm gonna be straight up with you guys. I'm like the only... Okay, here's the thing. Yes, I'm well aware that Sonic is a massively popular franchise. It has spawned in countless video games. Sonic, and also spawned in 3 multi-million-dollar selling movies as of late. Has had multiple cartoons, and has become a cultural phenomenon that pretty much was a big deal back in the early 90s. And obviously now today, but especially around this time since, well, this was the game that really got the Genesis a lot of attention. And started that, or was really the thing that helped start that major rivalry back in the early 90s between Sonic and Mario. But here's the thing. I'm not really a big fan of Sonic. And that's coming from someone who actually played this very game 4 years ago for you guys. yes, I did stream the original Sonic the Hedgehog back in 2021. And even though I thought that game was fine, I just still don't care about the franchise as a whole. So, and well, let's just, and not to get into details, but let's just say some recent events have really made me not want to associate myself with this. So, but that's besides the point. But even just putting that bias aside, I will admit that it is a very important game as well. Obviously, Sonic Team would eventually, this was the game that started a multi-million-dollar franchise for Sega and basically became Sega's mascot, for better and for worse. So I think it only makes sense to nominate it, but there's a reason why I've not nominated a single Sonic game in any of my other videos up until this point. So, sorry if it sounds very petty, but that's just admittedly how I feel. So let's move on to talking about the other two games. The games that have a bit more of, I guess, mature, in air quotes, tone. At least as mature of video games you can get in the early 90s. Duke Nukem and Catacomb 3. Now, Duke Nukem. Again, this is not their first game, but this is the first game that got Apogee a decent amount of attention at the time that obviously still has a bit of a staying power to this day. So, and of course, as I mentioned in our 1993 episode and our 1996 episode, yes, while Duke Nukem is most known for his appearance in Duke Nukem 3D, being basically a Doom clone, Duke Nukem did not start off as a first-person shooter franchise. It started off as a platformer franchise. And this was, in fact, that platforming game. And it's a decent little, DOS platformer that Apogee, now 3D Realms, by the way. Yes, 3D Realms and Apogee are the same company, for those who don't know. So yeah, Duke Nukem's their little darling that, it's been a thing, kind of like with Sonic here for Sega. So yeah, like 3D Realms / Apogee, this was a decent little platformer. It's kind of like a Mega Man clone, I guess you can call it a Mega Man clone, but it's actually a surprisingly decent one at that. So I'm willing to give it credit. And then last but not least, we got ourselves Catacomb 3D. And again, I am well aware that this is technically not id Software's first game, which yes, id Software made this game. This is not their first game, but it was the first game that was that did get them a decent amount of attention at the time. And well, truth be told, this, funny enough, yes, this is a first-person shooter in 1991. This predates Wolfenstein 3D, although it's not really like Wolfenstein or really any other first-person shooter, for that matter. It's a bit more. It's more of a first-person action-adventure game more than it is a first-person shooter, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird. And I know some people are going to be, oh, well, what about Commander Keen? Well, two things. Number one, Commander Keen wasn't actually that successful until its sequel coming out, I think, in around 1992. And so that was a bit more of a, burner success. That, and also, I don't like Commander Keen. So Catacomb 3D it is. So, God, that sounded terrible. I'm sorry. But yeah, I know I'm making fun of these games. I've been jesting about them, but I'm not gonna lie, I do find why these games are very important. I mean, these started some of the biggest names in gaming history. I mean, you got id Software, Sonic Team, 3D Realms, Rockstar. I think it makes sense for us to have these games nominated because, well, without these games, some of the biggest franchises we wouldn't have ever known probably wouldn't really be a thing. And so I think it makes sense for us to nominate all these games. But let's actually choose the winner. Which, by the way, I am going to spoil this right now. I am nominating Sonic, but it's not going to be the winner. So, which... You can hate me all you want, but I don't fucking care. But anyways, let's go over the winner. So, envelope. Here we go. So, the award for the best game by a new studio for 1991 goes to Lemmings. Yes. The would later be known as Rockstar guys won this one. But it's not because of that. It's actually because this game, again, I guess I'm kind of weird about puzzle games because, like, you know, I think even on this very series, I used to say I wasn't really a big fan of puzzle games. But I'm gonna be honest with you guys, the past, like, 5-ish years or so, I've kind of come to terms that I kind of need more games that are a bit more chilled out, that are a bit more, you know, less about shooting people in the face in massive battles. And I kind of need something that's a bit more, I want to say lighthearted, because I wouldn't really call this game that, but it's more a bit more stress-free, I guess, is the best term for that. Like, it's a bit more of a, I don't know, it's just a bit more of a light, I don't know how to describe it. Basically, I don't want all my games to be, like, super serious, because this game doesn't take itself seriously at all. Though, it kind of has a bit of a cool, unique premise. Because, well, as I described in whenever I was talking about this game, it's more you're like directing where the lemmings themselves are being controlled. And that's how you solve the puzzles, because they will just keep going as far as they can. And you have to, like I said, you have to make sure that you use the different abilities and skills that they have in order for you to be able to progress to the next level. And for 1991, it filled a role. It had its purpose, and I'm willing to accept that. I mean, it also helps that because of the sandbox-like nature of this game, it actually makes for a lot of replay value in a lot of ways, because you've got so many different skill sets that you can actually use. You've got, you know, you have the ability to have certain, like, for you to be able to block people from going into certain directions so that you don't get them killed. You can have them build stuff, destroy stuff. You can have it to where some of them can just spontaneously combust. Which I know that sounds terrible, but... And I know me describing the gameplay doesn't actually make any sense. But once you actually see the gameplay, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's a cool little puzzle game that I think you guys should at least try out if you can find a copy of it. I don't think it's on Steam or GOG, which is pretty unfortunate. So, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, none of the original Lemming games are on there. That stupid freaking indie game is on there, though. Not the indie games are stupid, but whatever. So, yeah, no, suffice to say, I don't know. I'm just feeling more lighthearted on this one. Go check out Lemmings if you haven't already. It is a bit sad that there hasn't been a Lemming game in 20 years, though. Which is like, damn. Yeah, last game was made by Team 17. Almost 20 years ago. Damn. I don't know. Go check it out. But yeah, let's move on to the next category. The action-adventure category. this year, I would definitely say... Oh, shoot. Sorry. 1991 was a decent year for the action-adventure, which, of course, as you can see down there, include general action, general adventure, action-adventure, horror games, although that's not going to be really a big factor in this anymore because survival horror games weren't a thing quite yet in 1991. But point-and-click games, that's a very important one from 1991. So what did I end up nominating? Well, here we go. So, oh shoot, the thing is not... I didn't make the names correct with their placements. Oh no. So, okay. But yeah. Surprisingly, a lot of DOS games on here that I put. I don't know. 1991, I will admit, part of the... I think part of my hesitancy with 1991 was it was less of a year for the Super Nintendo, and it was more of a year for DOS games. 1991, I will fully admit, was... you're going to see a lot of DOS games, is my point. But, okay, let's start off with a not DOS game. Let's start off with Gauntlet 3. Sega Genesis, beat 'em up. Hack and slash, whatever you want to call it. This is the third game in that little series. So, not really a game that I would say really reinvented the wheel. It's just a generally pretty solid hack and slash beat 'em up for the time. So if you like games like Dragon was it Double Dragon? Then you'll feel at home with Gauntlet. I just wanted to nominate it because I like fantasy games, and I wanted to give more Sega Genesis games at least a bit of attention, some attention. So there you go. And we got Police Quest 3, which is another sort of, I guess, point and click, kinda, sort of little adventure game. It's more or less just kind of more of a mystery solving sort of game. That's kind of what the Police Quest games originally were. Funny enough, kind of as I don't want to say spin-off, but kind of an offshoot of the King's Quest games. And they would eventually change into a completely different genre. They would eventually be known as Police Quest SWAT, which, yes, that does mean that SWAT 4 is in that same lineage. I don't know how. Well, I know how, but, But yeah, no, if you're interested in a more... if you basically want a game that basically was a precursor to Disco Elysium, that's basically the best description as I can give to Police Quest. In this case, Police Quest 3. So, because it's basically if Disco Elysium was made back in the 90s. So, yeah. But let's move over to the Game Boy, by the way, Police Quest DOS game. Let's move over to the Game Boy. Metroid 2, Return of Samus. A surprisingly little hit on the Game Boy, which you would not think would be the case, considering that the Game Boy was notorious for having inferior ports of a lot of games that were on the NES. But surprisingly, this is actually a pretty good continuation of Metroid in its own respect. It has the general gameplay style of the original game from the NES, and I thought it transitioned very well, or it translated very well. So, yeah, surprisingly a game that I would unironically recommend. Just keep in mind it's going to be black and white or black and green depending on the system that you use. So do keep that in mind. And then we got ourselves Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which, this of course is our first true Super Nintendo game. this was a big deal when it first came out. I mean, obviously, the third game in the Zelda franchise, and basically being a massive overhaul compared to the previous games in every single way. I don't think I really need to say anything else. I mean, it makes sense why we would even have this as a nominee. Go check out Link to the Past. Like, if you want a good entry-level Zelda game that is 2D, this is your best bet. So, yeah. And then we've got ourselves the point-and-click darling of the early 90s. I say that as if that's a bad thing. It's not. I'm just, is what it is. We got ourselves the sequel to Monkey Island. Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge. LeChuck being the bad guy that you see right there. So, it just continued on the sort of cool, point-and-click adventure style of the original Monkey Island. So, if that's something that... okay, let me phrase that. It really isn't that much different compared to the first game. There's some cool new things that they add here, like some new prompts and stuff, as well as some updated visuals. But in actuality, Monkey Island 2, again, it's basically just a continuation of what was already established with the first game. Which, by the way, that is a very common thing I think I'm going to be talking about a lot on this particular episode, is that a lot of games that people tend to forget that a lot of sequels, especially in the 90s and the 2000s, they were sequel in name, but they weren't really that different from a lot of the games that preceded them. Which, I mean, at this point, I think people... I mean, back in the day, that was seen as a big criticism, but I think in hindsight, people did not really take that for granted. I think people really wish that... ironically, I think a lot of people wish that we kept doing that. But whatever. Point is, Monkey Island 2, decent little adventure point and click. So if you liked the first game, you're more than likely going to like this. So, but whatever. Let's go over the winner. So I know I'm basically saying nothing. I am well aware of that. I guess I just don't want to be harping too much on the games. So let's just... Okay. The award for the best action adventure of 1991 goes to... Shocker! Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I mean, it's Link to the Past. This game is extremely influential. Like, I mean, here's the thing about this game as well. This wasn't my first Zelda game. So funny enough, I actually played the original Zelda game before I played any other game of the franchise, because I'm someone who likes playing the first of a franchise in order for me to understand its roots. But this was the game that I actually played after that. And I thought it was actually a lot of, surprise. It actually genuinely surprised me on just not only of a difference it was compared to the first Zelda game, but just being a genuinely pretty fun little, top-down game. Because this game obviously returned to the over-top view, because if you guys remember whenever I played Zelda 2, it was kind of a, it was like a weird hybrid game. It tried to be like, it basically tried to be a more traditional side-scrolling action-adventure game, but then there were sections that were more platformy, and there was also a level-up system that it was trying to make it out to be an RPG. It was a weird experiment, and I know it has its offenders. I am not one of them, unfortunately. And so, returning back to that over-top view of the first game, I thought was a much needed return to form. Also, this game, I mean, it really isn't like, it basically feels more like the actual true sequel in the sense, or I guess the prequel in this game sense, because this game takes place before the events of the first Zelda game. And like the gameplay at its core, it's very similar to the first game, to the first Zelda game, but it really feels like a natural evolution of a lot of that in every single department. With breakable objects, being able to go into multiple different instances on a map, so on and so forth. The gameplay streamlined, and I think that was really cool. And it's way easier. It's not even close. But also, a very important thing for 1991, and this is something that is very important about a lot of games from around this time. This was amongst one of the first games, at least to my knowledge, that really did have background lore in its game. Which I know that might sound like that's kind of, we take a lot of that for granted nowadays, but again, keep in mind that throughout the 1980s, when you played a game, you just kind of played the game. You didn't really think about any of the lore shit in it at all. You didn't really care about what you were doing. And that even applies to the first two Zelda games, where it's just kind of yeah, we're gonna fight the evil Ganon. Hooray. It didn't really flesh out its world. But Link to the Past was one of the first games, at least to my record, to my knowledge, was the first to do that. And I think I have to give credit where credit is due in that respect. And even just going through a lot of the dungeons, I mean, I liked a more dungeon crawler style of games, and the original Zelda game was definitely that. And the fact that this game continued a lot of those similar themes, just making it a lot easier for you to be able to play, I can appreciate. So yeah, no, Link to the Past, good game. I don't understand why this game has its haters. Hate on Zelda 2, not this one. All right, platformers. So this one is going to be a very interesting one, which, by the way, I'm just going to spoil this right now, and I know this is going to get a lot of people angry at me, but I've already described it in our first category. I will not be nominating Sonic the Hedgehog for this particular category. I'm sorry. It's just not a franchise I want to really give a lot of attention to. But there are plenty of other games that are platformers that I found that I think do warrant a lot of attention. Thankfully, from big names from the time. So we do have Duke Nukem nominated here, because it is a decent little Mega Man style of game, which obviously we have the proper Mega Man later. But let's start with Ninja Gaiden. So this is the third game of the original Ninja Gaiden sequel, or series, excuse me. So this is, the last of that original wave of Ninja Gaiden games. And this game is hard as balls. I mean, all of the original Ninja Gaiden games were extremely hard. But as far as being more combat-focused games and more acrobatic-based platformer is question mark. I'll get to that in a little bit. I like that. You can definitely tell that this game helped inspire a lot of other, side-scrolling action games. I'd say Mark of the Ninja, for example, is massively influenced by this game, for sure. And, those style of, games, which I find to be pretty cool, obviously owe a lot to the original series. Although, from what I can tell, I think this is a lot of people's least favorite game out of that original series, which is funny because it's kind of the same thing with the reboot series. But I don't know. if I want to play a game that has a lot of platforming elements, this is the style that is 2D. This is definitely the style that I'm into. Though, I guess that raises the question, does this even count as a platformer? I don't know. Because it has platforming elements. I don't know. I guess it's kind of the same thing with like Prince of Persia or Sly Cooper with me. Where it's like, yeah, it has elements, but that's not the core of the gameplay. I don't know. However, what is a platformer? And what is also hard as balls? Super Ghouls and Ghosts. The Super Nintendo sequel to Ghosts and Goblins. I know this is not the artwork that most people associate. They typically think of like the medieval knight guy going like fighting the zombies. This is just going to be the one I found. And this one, I think I like this game more so for its aesthetics. And that kind of applies to every single Ghosts and Goblins game. Because these games are also notoriously hard. But I still kind of enjoy the look because I'm a sucker for fantasy stuff, and this is being more of a dark fantasy, borderline horror fantasy thing. I can at least tolerate it a bit more, and even just playing the version that is provided on the Super Nintendo Classic here, I thought it was fine. It can be kind of annoying trying to figure out exactly what you're supposed to do, but I think it was decent. So yeah, go check it out. All right, and then we've got ourselves Super Castlevania 4. Wait, hold up. This is a remake. This is not a true sequel. How dare you nominate this? Yeah, I know I don't like. Usually on this show, for those who don't know, I don't like nominating remakes or remasters for any other category other than a remake remaster category, because to me it just feels like cheating, because it's because you're basing your game off of something that was already established prior. And I usually am not a big fan of that. That being said, though, this is the type of game I'm not like I can't ignore, because even though this is a remake of the original Castlevania game from 1986, it was pretty fun for the most part going through this. Because yes, I did play this on stream twice. First time not as great as the other time, and I still did get pissed at a specific point. Fuck you, Death. You are the worst boss fight in the game easily. Like, that's like the one thing that I think objectively needs to be changed in this game. But if I've got to be truthful and honest with myself, especially playing it off of this is a really kick-ass game in a lot of ways. Yeah, it is super annoying and frustrating to have to go through certain sections, but the core of the game is still really fun. And this game, to this day, all over 30 years later, still looks beautiful. Like the presentation is spot on with this game. So no complaints there. And even just the actual movement itself, for a Castlevania game that was innovating on the first 3 games, it felt natural. So yeah, no, like, if I'm going to be truthful to you guys, even though this game is technically a remake, it was able to transcend itself from being just a remake. And I feel like it just feels weird to not nominate it for this, especially since we played it. So I'm going to give it a nod here. And then we got ourselves Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, another Game Boy exclusive game, kind of a loose sequel of Kid Icarus on the NES. and it's fine. You know, Kid Icarus wasn't really ever Nintendo's biggest property. I mean, they never really did anything with him outside of Super Smash Bros. Hell, he's been in more Super Smash Bros. Games than he's been in his own games. Oh, God. That's terrible. But suffice to say, it's fine. So we'll nominate here. Same thing with Mega Man 4. It's just a decent, game that, again, doesn't reinvent the wheel. Why fix what isn't broken? That's why we're nominating the Mega Man 4 in here. Because if you, it's a part of that hexology of NES Mega Man games. So if you like all those, you're going to like this. Let's go over the winner. So. God, Rosemary, don't scratch that. Seriously. Okay, she has little claw covers on her claws so that she doesn't scratch. But she needs to stop messing with my chair, because this chair, it's already been tattered the few years before you were even here. You don't need to scratch it more, okay? You don't need to scratch it more. She does not like being held. She does not like being held. Oh my god. Okay. Do you want to be co-host now? Hey, Rosemary. Do you want to present... Rosemary. Do you want to present the award? Okay, she does. Alright. Alright, Rosemary. Read off what is the best thing for 1991. The best platformer of 1991. Rosemary. Okay, she's being distracted again. She's ruining the bit. Okay, all jokes aside, best platformer game, Super Castlevania 4. I did it! I finally gave a win to a remake for a non-remake category. But this is the exception to that rule that I didn't have a rule at the beginning, because that was more so to apply to more modern games. But I'm making an exception for this one, because I've got to be real with you guys. This game is, at least for its time, even though I will admit it's definitely not entirely my style of game that I would have preferred, this game can still be kind of bullshit at points. At least in a more modern gamer perspective. Again, the death boss fight, absolutely terrible. And the lead up to that fight with the other mini bosses you have to go through, absolutely terrible section of the game. But everything else in this game, I think, counterbalances it overall into being a pretty decent game, when you consider the fact that this game has basically overhauled everything about the original game, with its movement sets, its level design. It's still hard, but trust me when I say this, if you thought that Castlevania 4 was bad as far as trying to play through, try playing the original game. I did that back in 2019 on my YouTube channel, and it was terrible. So, the game itself, for an NES game, it's a lot better than most other NES games, but it's still kind of bullshit in a lot of ways. This game's not as bullshit. It still has bullshit in it. But it was a step in the right direction. And like I said, the level design, I actually love this game's level design. Going through the spinning rooms that you're in, having to use the whip so that it can lasso around hooks. It's so cool. And honestly, yeah, even though this is a remake, this was honestly the first example of justifying remaking an entire game. So that's why I'm going to be giving it the win. Because this was the game that proved that you can, take a good idea and improve upon it later down the line. So, truth be told, if we did have an actual remake category, this would easily be the winner. Excuse me. Not that there were too many video game remakes in the early 90s, but this game really was the blueprint for that. For having a solid ass remake of your game. So that's why we're giving it the win here. Alright. Role-playing games. I'm going to be real with you guys. This was a pretty hard category for me to do. Because not because there weren't a supplement of games, because there was. The problem is that a lot of the games that kept appearing were from the same franchises. Like, there were 3 or 4 different games in the Final Fantasy series alone released this year. There were also 3 Ultima games released in 1991. But not a lot of anything else. And, well, kind of as a loose rule here, I only like choosing 1 game per franchise here. I was able to find just enough, but just barely. So this is what I came up with. So the first game we got here is Might and Magic 3, Isles of Terra. I mean, if you are more into your sort of, I guess this isn't really like a traditional, or let me phrase that. This isn't like a lot of your like action, like your PC action RPGs of the 90s. This one honestly still feels more like it's rooted in a lot of the 80s PC role-playing games. But it's still a decent entry in the Might and Magic series. So I'm not going to discredit it because it's more of a turn-based sort of RPG. So if that's something that you're into, I guess you can check it out. I guess there's not really much else for me to say about Might and Magic 3. It's a decent entry in the Might and Magic series, but I wouldn't really call it a top-tier game in the franchise. So, take that for what you will. And then we got Arcus Odyssey, which I don't think that was actually the name that it was originally known. Which, by the way, keep that in mind. That is a pretty common thing with a lot of games from this time period, is that a lot of games do tend to be like a lot of games in the early 90s and even the 80s, they tend to have different names depending on the region. So let me look up. Oh no, never mind. It was what it was called. Okay, I thought it was something else. Okay, so yeah, this is a Genesis JRPG. So taking a lot of inspiration from specifically, I think, the Dragon Quest series of games. So if you basically want Sega's version, even though it wasn't really Sega who made this, it was Wolf Team. So Namco. If you wanted Namco's attempt at them doing their own Dragon Quest, not a bad game. I'm not gonna lie. Go check it out. We also have Final Fantasy IV on here. God, it's so... Okay. Also, Ultima Runes of Virtue is on here. I will admit, I am doing this one as my choice for Ultima because the other Ultima games that were released this year, they weren't really that great. And truth be told, this isn't the greatest game either. But what made me impressed with this is that they were able to put a full-fledged role-playing game experience and put it on the Game Boy. So, and they didn't really compromise anything. And this is that more traditional top-down third, like, you know, that top-down isometric style of PC role-playing game. They were able to put that on the Game Boy. So that's impressive. And I will give credit where credit is due. Final Fantasy IV is right here, though. Okay, I gotta be real. Final Fantasy IV. I'm sorry. I know I'm bowing down to Final Fantasy IV on this one. And I usually bow down to Final Fantasy whenever, like, because, like, I know it's a basic, easy choice. But here's the thing. Final Fantasy set the standard for a lot of RPGs. And truth be told, even though this was known as Final Fantasy II in North America, because this is where the confusion began for people if they don't know their history, like, if they don't know, this was known as Final Fantasy II in North America because Final Fantasies 2 and 3 in Japan, they didn't release in North America in time, so they just called 4 2. I know, it's stupid, it's dumb, but I'm just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to call it Final Fantasy IV. But there's a reason, though, why Final Fantasy has set the standard. And truth be told, this game basically, some people call it the first truly good Final Fantasy game. I don't agree with that. I actually think that the original Final Fantasy game still holds up to this day. But Final Fantasy IV was really the game that got the franchise really repping up into high gear. It was the game that set a lot of the precedent that we would know of a Final Fantasy game to this day. Not to mention, a lot of the bugs and glitches that were in the first 3 games, not in this game at all. They fixed, if not everything, most of everything that were issues with those games. Whether it be the fact that in the original game half the weapons didn't work, or that there were a lot of really dumb one-hit death bullshit glitches that kept happening in Final Fantasy 3, or even just the fact that Final Fantasy 2 exists. I'm not a Final Fantasy 2 hater, I'm just saying. This was the game that really did look at the NES era and rectified a lot of those problems. Not to mention, just like with Legend of Zelda, this was the first game to really start fleshing out its own world and start forming its own lore and narrative. A basic narrative lore, lore, because, this is still an early 90s game. But at the time, this was breaking boundaries. So, I have to give a lot of credit with that. Also, the presentation as a whole, really damn solid for for a Super Nintendo game. It has a similar presentation to that of the Castlevania 4, where it uses a lot of cutscenes, which is something that was pretty impressive for a Super Nintendo game. And also, I just want to throw in another point on here, the job system. I think Final Fantasy 3, or was it Final Fantasy 2? They technically had a job system, but this was the first game that really put it into the spotlight, so that you can basically side activities essentially. So this game, at least to my knowledge, was really the first game to add in side activities in an RPG. Which I know that sounds like, wait, there was a time before side activities in RPGs? Yes. The old Final Fantasy games, the old Dragon Quest games, hell, even like Might and Magic and Ultima, they barely had any sort of side stuff that you can do to earn extra XP in. But this was one of the games, at least to my knowledge, where it made that into a major part of the game. And that's something that I think warrants a lot of praise here. So, yeah, no, Final Fantasy IV, I'll give it the win. Alright, shooter games. So, again, not really first-person shooters, although Catacomb 3D was a first-person shooter. That was not the norm. We're mostly going to be talking about shoot-em-ups and rail shooters on this. And this year was a surprisingly big year for that genre in particular, much to my surprise. So what did I find? Well, first of all, we're nominating Catacomb 3D here. But I'm also going to be nominating a few hidden gems here. So the first hidden gem being Tracks, a Game Boy exclusive that, you know, it's basic looking, but I guess the best comparison to this would probably be something like Akari Warriors, like Commando or something like that. So if that piques your interest, that might be something you're into, especially if you want something that is more vehicular focused, I guess is the best way to describe this game, question mark. I guess. I don't know. This is an interesting game that I thought looked cool. So, there you go. Also, another sort of hidden little gem here, Crisis Force. This was, I will admit, this one is a bit more of a sleeper hit, or really just a sleeper, because it didn't really release outside of Japan. Yes, this is another Japanese exclusive game. Basically, think, you know, your typical shoot 'em ups at the time. You know, like 1943 or like Galaga, stuff like that. It's really not that different from any of those. It's more of your typical arcade shooter, but I like that style of shooter. So it's not my favorite type of shooter, of course, but it's something I'm willing to give some praise for. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but I thought it was cool. All right, now for the veterans. Operation C, or Operation Contra, because this is a handheld version of a Contra game, or not based off of any game in particular, but it's still Contra nonetheless. Again, surprisingly pretty good for a Game Boy game. It's actually surprising that a lot of these games, like, I guess I'm just very impressed with games like this because the technology was still kind of primitive compared to a lot of other handheld devices that we would see later down the line. And, well, truth be told, I kind of wish that more phones started to actually have nowadays. But that's besides the point. God, that was pretty sad. But yeah, no, I'd say as far as, oh shoot, I did not mean to press that. As far as being able to offer basically the original experience of Contra and Super Contra, but on a handheld device, that just really impresses me for some weird reason. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know. I just find it cool. So, yeah, no. Cool. Alright, last game. This time, an actual arcade game. Which I know I rarely do. The only other time I did that, I'm pretty sure, was Mortal Kombat. But we got ourselves Rolling Thunder 2. So this one's a weird one for me. So I used to own this thing called the Namco Museum 50th Anniversary on the PlayStation 2. It was a compilation of a bunch of Namco arcade games. And on that was the original Rolling Thunder. And I don't know why, but that was always the game that I would play on that version of Namco Museum. I don't know what it was. It just has always intrigued me in a weird way. So, I don't know. I guess this is due to the fact that it was just kind of cool shooting a bunch of, guys that looked like a certain type of spooky ghost club member that I always liked to do because, that is always objectively moral to do, but that's the point. But I don't know, just being like a shoot 'em up, side-scrolling shoot 'em up. I don't know, it's just kind of fun. So learning that there was actually a sequel to this game also intrigued me. Though I will say, it is a lot slower paced compared to the original game. But that's not a bad thing. Though it does mean that I do think that this game isn't as good, because I don't know, it just doesn't really interest me. Okay, Rosemary, don't go down there. That's actually dangerous for you. Okay. Yeah, she was down in the wires. You can't be down there. It will shock you. And also shut down the stream, which I also, that's less important than you getting shocked. That is dangerous. Don't do that. But anyways, yeah, Rolling Thunder 2, it's not as good, but I would still recommend you guys check it out. And that's coming from someone who doesn't even really like arcade games. So, yeah, go check out Rolling Thunder the Second if you like that type of stuff. So, all right, Rosemary, do you want to actually do you want to present the award? You want to present the award? Yeah, you want to present the award? Huh? Okay, no, she hates being held. She is not like Anakin. Okay. Alright. Let's get this category out of the way. So, the award for Best Shooter Game of 1991 goes to... Oh no, she's worked up. Operation C! What can I say? I am very easily impressed. But, I mean, here's the thing, is that, I always liked Contra. It's fast-paced, gun shooting, guns go blazing action that, honestly, has held up surprisingly compared to a lot of other NES games. I know it originally was an arcade game, but even just talking about that NES version, it was definitely a lot more accessible, even if it's still hard as balls, compared to many other NES games at the time. Guys, you have no idea how bad the NES library eventually got. That's why I don't put it above a B tier on my consoles tier list. I just objectively can't because of how much garbage was on that console. So to see a game that basically had the same exact detailed sprites, had the same exact gameplay, extremely fluid animations, and because it was a handheld, they made it to where the movement was more compensated with said gameplay. It was all on the Game Boy? Sign me up for that. I'd buy 1,000,000 copies of that. Not actually, but you get my point. That is just amazing. So, yeah. And also, I don't know. Wait, does the Konami code work on this game? I don't remember if it does. Let me look that up. Because if it does, then oh my god, that's like a big bonus right there. Does Operation C have the Konami code? Because I know Super Contra doesn't, which is stupid. It has the Konami code! There's a bonus for you guys! So, yeah. Go check it out. Operation C, a surprisingly really good hit on the Game Boy. So, yeah, also a lot of Game Boy games on this one. Not just DOS. Game Boy games are also really popping off on 1991. Holy shit. Who would have thought? Alright. Sim Strategy. 1991 was definitely a year where, I mean, platformers were, still reigning supreme. But on DOS, this was a very, very big year for the sim strategy category. It honestly kind of shocked me just how big of a year this ended up being for this category. Because we got some big names coming up. So, first of all, let's start off with something that is a bit lesser known, but I will admit is kind of more of a guilty pleasure of mine, but I wanted to give it a nod anyways. We got Simant. Yes, this game was a financial failure when it first came out. And, Will Wright himself did consider this to be his, one of his bigger regrets in his gaming career. And I think that's a bit of a shame because I think that has more to do with the attitude that this game got received at the time compared to later down the line. That and also that terrible Super Nintendo. Well, not terrible. It was just It was just a mediocre Super Nintendo port. It wasn't the worst port you could have done for this style of game. But yeah, I'm gonna be honest. As far as being not just like a life sim, but also being a pseudo RTS, I kind of like this game. I understand where people come from as far as them not really giving this, people giving this game some flack. Because it's more of a strategy game than it is a simulation. But I kind of like that, And also, it has that sort of early that early 90s edutainment sort of charm that admittedly I do kind of like. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know. Simant, not at all bad. Definitely not Will Wright's worst game. Really? He thinks this is his worst game? One of his worst games? I don't think I agree with that. I think Simant is fine. Again, just treat it less as an ant farm simulator and treat it more as a strategy game. So, yeah. And then we got Utopia, which it's kind of awkward talking about this game because you see the other major strategy game right, a few points away. But this one, well, I guess it's kind of like Simant in that it's more of a hybrid of a sim strategy game rather than just strictly, a sim or a strategy game. It's like a city building strategy game, if that makes sense. So it took inspiration from SimCity, but it also took inspiration from oh god, why can't I think of it? Not SimEarth. I don't remember, but essentially, like, it's more. I kind of consider this funny enough to be more of a predecessor to something like Anno. So if you like how Anno was kind of a hybrid between city building and strategy, you'll more than likely are going to like Utopia. So if that's of any interest, yeah, go check it out. Next up, Gunship 2000. And keep in mind, this is the DOS version. This is not, well, I mean, obviously, because it didn't even exist yet, but this is not the PlayStation 1 version, because the PlayStation 1 version is trash. We're talking about the DOS version. This is a pretty good helicopter simulator, which is a very rare niche, but a niche that this game was able to fill, at least for the time. Obviously, it wouldn't be exactly how you would fly a helicopter nowadays, but as far as being an improvement on the original game, which I think came out in 88, having a 3-year jump from that to this, pretty impressive. So, yeah, suffice to say, if you want that sort of simulation, go for it. Check out Gunship 2000. Though, let's be real with ourselves. The true picks on here are these next two. Sid Meier's Civilization is our first, big name here. Which is funny because, I mean, the most recent game in this franchise, Civ 7, just came out last week, which is just like, wow. Though that game has had a lot of negative press, but let's not focus on Civ 7. Let's focus on Civ 1. Again, a big deal when it came out and started a massive franchise going forward. Good. I'm sorry. I mean, this game, again, kind of a theme with a lot of these early 90s games. It was not just a, it wasn't just like this, grandiose turn-based strategy game. It was also a game that encouraged, that had some education value to it. Granted, not really super in-depth, but it showed you how to build your own civilization. It also helped teach you about different civilizations that existed in the world that people know about. And while it was obviously presented in a very flat plane because 3D was still not really a thing at this point, so you couldn't really render massive continents like you can do on in Civ 6 or 7. But with Civ 1, what it was able to achieve was it was able to have a lot of the building blocks, basically it was like a very solid foundation for you to be able to control whatever you have and be able to issue different commands and build buildings and whatnot, if that makes sense. Very basic nowadays, of course, but for the time, big deal. Which, speaking of big deals, Wing Commander 2, Vengeance of the Kilrathi. I'm someone who's actually a pretty, big fan of combat space flight sim games. I became a really big fan of them ever since I actually played both Star Wars X-Wing and the original Wing Commander, just kind of out of loose research, kind of looking into this sort of genre, because it is unfortunately now a niche genre in the current day, but back in the 90s, these were big, games. I mean, we've talked about them throughout this entire show, and obviously Wing Commander 2, even though I would argue this is another example of a game that really wasn't that innovative in comparison to its original game, I would still argue is a very solid game in its own right, with some updated graphics, of course, but it really didn't play all that. It doesn't really play all that different compared to the first game. Again, another common pattern here, but I'd still say it's worth a try. So if you guys haven't already, play Wing Commander 2. But let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best sim strategy game of 1991 goes to Sid Meier's Civilization. Yeah. This game is very important. You can definitely say that, you know, in today's world, you could say it is the worst Civilization game, but you have to keep in mind the perspective of when this game first came out. There weren't any other games that were like this. Nowadays, there's tons of franchises that are like this. Hell, there's entire, this wasn't like a grand strategy game. That concept wouldn't really become a thing until around like the late 90s, early 2000s. But it helped lay the groundwork for those types of games, funny enough. While also, really popularizing the idea of just having strategy games be a very popular thing. It also helped that this game, you didn't actually have to play this game in one particular way. Which again is something that you might think is like, oh, that's just kind of a given. At the time, and we even talked about this with Lemmings. With Lemmings, the reason why that game was big was because most strategy and puzzle games, you can only really play them in one very specific way. But with games like Lemmings, at least as far as puzzles are concerned, and games like Civilization in the strategy game department, you have, it allows for so much more flexibility for you to be able to do what you want. Like, let's say, for example, if you wanted to either, make, like, either build a city in your first turn, or if you wanted to save up on resources to focus on, building up units. Like stuff like that. Where, like, that might sound like a very basic concept now, but Civilization 1 was one of the first games that basically was like, okay, you can have, you don't have to, like, play in the way we want you to play. And that's something that I like. Also, this game has, has set up major and minor goals, or short-term and long-term victory goals, similar to what you have in the Civilization games or even Total War games later down the line. And I think that works in this game's favor. And like I said, this game helped get a lot of people into learning about history, which is something that I always appreciate. Because you can have a game that is entertaining, but also informative. So I gotta give credit where credit is due. So yeah, Civ 1, respect. All right, here we go. The most subjective category, best art direction. This one was a bit of a tough cookie. Again, there's only so much you can really do when it comes to more pixelated graphics. Like, you're a lot more limited, but you can still at least sense the visual, like, a style that they're trying to go for with a lot of these games. And keep in mind, these are games that we have nominated, so I am going to make this one quick. So we got Lemmings for its sort of, cool atmospheric parts that I think look pretty cool. There's some really cool, surprisingly like dark fantasy stuff that they put into some of the later levels in Lemmings, which are references to some like a lot of the games from the 80s. So that's pretty cool. And even just the visual style of the Lemmings themselves is a very unique design for the time. And yes, I did end up deciding to choose Sonic on here, not because of what it would eventually become, but I guess just sort of the fact that like the designs themselves have become iconic over time. And I'll even admit this, the levels themselves they did look pretty good for the time. So it's not that I'm going to be completely ignorant on Sonic, it's just I wanted to give it a nod. So just putting a bias aside. Also, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I wanted to give this a nod as well. I mean, just look at this game and compare it to the previous Legend of Zelda games. This game definitely has a lot more of a defined high fantasy look to it, which I think is pretty cool. And then, of course, Super Castlevania 4. Honestly, a gorgeous gothic look that still holds up to this day. And then Monkey Island 2 being definitely more limited in looks, but just sort of the pirate motif that they go for, I think, still looks pretty cool. Regardless if you play the special edition or the original version. Obviously, we're talking about the original version of this game, and the game still, like, for the game, like, for whenever this came out, I think it still looks pretty cool. So, alright, but what's gonna win this one? Well, let's figure that out. So, the award for the best art direction of 1991 goes to Super Castlevania 4. I'm biased with this one. I'm biased. But I do genuinely think this game has a very cool look, and it holds up to this very damn day. Again, having a bit more of a gothic look, which, I mean, every single Castlevania game has, but this game in particular was able to really make it really did take advantage of the 16-bit hardware that was on the Super Nintendo. The visual presentation, I mean, just that opening crawl where it's like in front of the gravestone, that alone, honestly, it's so beautiful. Like, it's so like, they were able to make so much work with the visual style of this game. That, again, a lot of games I feel like take for granted now, but back in the day, oh my god, this was one of the, you could argue this was one of the most immersive games for its time. I mean, it's helped by the fact that this game continues the trend of Castlevania. Well, I guess this was really the game I feel like you can genuinely say that the music really started to shine in Castlevania. I mean, Castlevania has always had some pretty iconic tracks. I mean, the first level music of the first game is pretty iconic, or even just the death sound where it's like da 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 da, which is pretty funny. I still find that song to be pretty funny. And they do have a remixed version of that, obviously, in this game, but I don't know. I still find it to be pretty cool. So yeah, overall, this game really was a bit... This really did showcase that this was next gen at the time. And I think that's pretty cool. So, even if this is not your favorite Castlevania game, because it's not my favorite Castlevania game, I at least respect it for taking a lot of like bold, creative decisions with this game, with its art direction. All right, that then leads us into the final category of the night, the game of the year. So, again, this year it had its ups, it had its downs, but there were plenty of games that came out in 1991 that are highly revered to this very day, and that I would argue eventually would eventually become some of the most influential games of all time. So, but we also have plenty of games that we talked about that, are well respected, but they're not like really household names. So what did I end up choosing? Because I feel like you can definitely take a lot of directions with this. But this is ultimately what I chose for this year. So, I chose 5 games to represent the Game of the Year nominations for 1991. And what I ultimately came up with was Final Fantasy IV, Sid Meier's Civilization, Legend of Zelda Link to the Past, Super Castlevania 4, and Monkey Island 2. I mean, Final Fantasy 2, Final Fantasy 4, God, I'm getting confused myself, is a fantastic RPG that helped bring to life a lot of the elements of a lot of JRPGs that we know to this day, and helped bring in a renaissance of JRPGs in the mid-90s. And I think that speaks for volumes there. And also for really ramping up Final Fantasy to becoming a major household name, at least in North America. It was already a major household name in Japan, but especially in North America, this game is important. Sid Meier's Civilization, obviously for being a game that helped popularize the turn-based strategy genre, was put both education and entertainment intertwined, and allowed a lot more flexibility with its gameplay compared to most other games for its time. I think, of course, speaks for itself. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past being a vast improvement compared to its previous games, and allowing a lot more lore and world building in its gameplay compared to any other game on the Super Nintendo other than Final Fantasy IV and Super Castlevania 4, which we'll get to in a second. It really was a showcase of true next-gen hardware for the Super Nintendo. And really did... it really was a game that was able to stand out compared to a lot of its other contemporaries. For good reason. Super Castlevania 4, because of just how the beautiful art direction in this game, and for being, honestly, a really fantastic remake of a game that otherwise you could argue kind of feels a bit pretty dated. It's not a perfect remake, but it was definitely the blueprint for other remakes to be showcased how to be done. And admittedly kind of having really cool movesets. Fuck you, Death, though. And then Monkey Island 2. I feel like we're snubbing this one, but trust me, I am not. This game is a fantastic sequel to the original game in a lot of ways. Definitely continuing a lot of the sort of I don't want to say narrative bits, because this game's not really much about it's a narrative, and it's more just so about the journey itself. And just being, just kind of continuing on the journey of being, kind of a lower tier pirate into becoming something beyond that. And going up against, the previous game's adversary in a much more impactful way. So, very, 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 very solid games that basically spawned in legend, or not spawned in, but definitely helped build a legacy for their respective franchises that still hold true to this day. I mean, they're still making games in most of these franchises, except for Castlevania, unfortunately. That one's unfortunately lost to time. But these games have had new games released in the past 2.5 years. So that should tell you that these franchises still have staying power. And hell, even Castlevania, even though there hasn't been a new mainline game in over 10 years, as of recording, of course, maybe they'll announce a Castlevania game later this year or next year. I don't know. I doubt it, because Konami's eccentric like that. But the fact that there's been a lot of collaborations in games like Dead Cells or Dead by Daylight, Castlevania still has staying power. I mean, the Netflix shows. So yeah, I think it makes sense to have the nominations. There can only be one winner, though. Let's choose said winner. So, the game of the year of 1991 goes to The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I know some people are seething at this one. They are so mad because I'm just going to be real with you guys. I don't know why this game gets a weird amount of hate online. Like, don't get it twisted. There's still a lot of people who love this game. And rightfully so, because this game I would definitely consider to be a fantastic game in its own right. It has really good gameplay. Going back to the original form of the gameplay from the first game and just improving it, better movement sets, better presentation, having some really cool dungeon sections in just general lore depth in this. But even despite a lot of that, there's just some weirdos online who try to play this game down as being like, oh, it's not that impressive. Yeah, it was. For 1991, this was a big deal. Maybe not a big deal to you nowadays because you probably played so much Triforce, Triforce Adventures on your 3DS. Which, I'm not shitting on Triforce Adventures. If you like that game, or was it Triforce Adventures? God damn it. I can't even think of the... Triforce Heroes. That's what it was called. Excuse my language. You probably played a lot of that. Because that's the latest game in this... Well, not the latest game in this style anymore. That goes to Echoes of Wisdom. But, 2D Zelda games... This was the blueprint for essentially every other 2D Zelda game from this point onwards. Yes, the original Legend of Zelda is basically a much needed respect, a game that needs a lot of respect because, it spawned the franchise. But this was the template for all those games. Link's Awakening, the Oracles games, the Four Swords games, Minish Cap, like I said, Triforce Heroes, Echoes of Wisdom, the Link's Awakening remake. The reason why those games play the way that they are and why those games are highly respected nowadays, you can thank Link to the Past for implementing a lot of those systems. And because of that, that's why people consider this to be one of the best Zelda games. At least in my opinion, this is easily one of the best 2D Zelda games. I don't know if I'd say it's the best Zelda game of all time. But you can make an argument. You could make a good argument that this is at least the most important game in the franchise. You can at least say that. And I will agree with you. But yeah, no. Link to the Past is my pick for the 1991 Game of the Year. So, hell yeah. But yeah, let's recap, shall we? So, to recap the awards, Best game by new studio, we gave it to Lemmings. Best action adventure, I don't know why it shows Flashback on there. What the hell? I need to fix that. Flashback was not released in 1991. That was released in 1992. What the fuck? This is what happens when you use the things for bases there. Okay, there we go. Much better. Anyways. Best game by new studio goes to Lemmings. Best action adventure goes to Link to the Past. Best platformer goes to Super Castlevania 4. Best RPG goes to Final Fantasy 4. Best shooter game goes to Operation C. Best sim strategy goes to Sid Meier's Civilization. Best art direction goes to Super Castlevania 4. And of course, the game of the year goes to Legend of Zelda Link to the Past. As far as my top 10 favorites, this is another tentative one. Keep that in mind. But as of this recording and as of right now, my top 10 games in no particular order from 1991 goes to Metroid 2, Legend of Link to the Past, Monkey Island 2, Final Fantasy 4, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, although that one's just fine, Super Castlevania 4, Wing Commander 2, Operation C, Lemmings, and Rolling Thunder 2. As far as guilty pleasures and honorable mentions, I'll of course make this one quick. I wanted to give a shout out to Wings of War being a cool sort of top-down fantasy shooter. Ultima Worlds, Worlds of Adventure 2, Martian Dreams, kind of being a cool alternate history steampunk sort of Ultima game, but it was kind of what it was. Final Fantasy Adventure and Legend 3 being decent handheld Final Fantasy games, which, funny enough, yes, they are Final Fantasy games in name, but little do people know, these would eventually spin off into their own respective franchises. Mana and Saga, respectively. So, yeah, you see why I'm kind of weird about this. I want to nominate these games because they're not actually Final Fantasy games, but because it's in the name, it's confusing. So, because yeah, Final Fantasy Adventure, it's actually it's a prequel technically to Secret of Mana, and Final Fantasy Legend, all the Legend games, they're actually a part of the Saga games. You know, like Romancing Saga, all that stuff. It's confusing. So, yeah. Still giving him a nod though. Also, Castlevania Belmont's Revenge being a decent Castlevania game on handheld. Ninja Gaiden Shadow being a cool Game Gear exclusive. Yeah, I like my Game Gear, guys. I'm sorry. NES Yoshi game because Yoshi's cool, and I don't know, just kind of a guilty pleasure. Also, guilty pleasure of mine, even though I acknowledge it's not very good, but it has that sort of early 90s cheese to it that I kind of like. Adventures of Willy Beamish, point and click adventure game that was originally on DOS, but eventually ported over to Sega CD of all things. I don't know, just kind of like, you know, early 90s look that I kind of like. I don't know. Conquest of Kingdoms, Legend of Robin Hood, just kind of a decent little, you know, a historical sort of thing. Crystal Caves being like a kind of puzzle platformer thing. Obedus, that fucking owl cover, Jesus Christ. Is another action. It's another like horror action thing. Realms, an RTS game. Funny enough, not so. Yeah, like I said with Dune 2, that wasn't the first RTS game, but it was definitely the first game to popularize it. Realms was just kind of a precursor, so that was kind of cool. Twilight 2000, which yes, that is a very modern looking cover. I could not find a high enough resolution of the original game's cover. It's another sort of RPG strategy style of game. So if that's something you're into. And then Wrath of the Demon, which, you know, kind of another hack and slash style of game. So, again, not huge names nowadays. So that kind of was my struggle with 1991. But I just wanted to give a bit of a shout out to some games regardless. But yeah, that was 1991. I finally got this episode done. Stay tuned for 1990. I'm hoping I'll be able to do it by the end of this month. I have been working on the slideshow for that kind of in the background. But yeah, that one's going to be interesting because is it going to be a good year or is it going to be a bad year? Considering 1992 was pretty bad, and 1991 was and also considering that Super Nintendo games, like a lot of the games that came out on the Super Nintendo actually first came out in 1990 proper. It could be a good year. I mean, it was a terrible year for literally everything else. But maybe, just maybe, I'm really crossing my fingers on that one, please. I don't want this to be a bad year. But suffice to say, we'll have to wait and find out. But either way, that's going to be it for tonight. I hope you guys did enjoy this episode. Of course, if you guys did, if you're watching this on Twitch, of course, hit the follow button and the bell icon. If you're watching this on YouTube, of course, hit the subscribe and the like. If you guys are watching this on either platform, of course, make sure you guys share this around to everyone else and do all that fun stuff. If you want to directly support the content, of course, you can either hit the subscribe button over at Twitch or check out the link tree where you can find the Throne link if you want to directly support me and the content. If you can't do any of that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad that you guys took time to watch this. But, of course, regardless of all that, make sure you share this to everyone, like I said, and just be awesome in the process. Until then, though, I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good night, and peace out. Take care, you guys.